After my husband died, I found his old typewriter. What I read changed everything. But before I ever opened that closet door, before I ever touched those cold black keys, there was a whole life. A quiet life. A steady life. A life that had slowly slipped into memory while I wasn't paying attention. My name is Rose Miller. I am 79 years old and I live alone in a small white house at the end of Maple Street. It's the kind of street where nothing much ever happens. Cars pass slowly. Leaves gather along the curbs in autumn. In summer, you can hear children playing a few blocks away, even though none live close enough for me to know their names. I have lived here for 46 years, long enough that every room holds a memory. Long enough that even the walls seem to remember when laughter used to live here. Most mornings I wake before the sun. Not because I need to, but because my body still expects another presence beside me. For decades, I would open my eyes and see Frank lying there, his back turned slightly toward me, one arm tucked under the pillow, breathing slow and steady. Even now, 2 years after he's gone, I sometimes reach out in that half-awake moment before I remember. Then I lie still, staring at the ceiling, letting the truth settle in again. He's gone, Rose. It's just you now. I make my tea the same way I always have. 1 spoon of sugar, a little milk. Then I sit at the kitchen table by the window and watch the street wake up. A neighbor starting his truck, a woman walking her dog, the mail carrier waving even though he's never said my name. The world moves forward while my days move in small, careful circles. It wasn't always like this. Once, this house was full. Once, there were voices in the hallway, music playing from the radio while dinner cooked, shoes kicked off by the door, and a man's coat hanging where it didn't belong. Once, I wasn't alone with my thoughts every morning. Frank and I met when I was 22. I was working at a diner just outside town, the kind of place with cracked booths and coffee that never quite tasted right. I'd started there after high school because I didn't know what else to do, and because my mother said a steady job was better than dreaming too big. Frank came in every Thursday after his shift at the factory, always at the same time, always ordering the same meal. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and a slice of pie he never finished. At first, he barely spoke, just nodded, said thank you, paid, and left. But I noticed the way he watched me, not in a bold way, in a quiet way. Like he was afraid to interrupt something important. One afternoon, when the place was nearly empty and rain streaked down the windows, he said, "You hum when you pour coffee." I froze, embarrassed. "I do?" He nodded, looking down at the counter, and said, "Just a little." That was Frank. He noticed things, he just didn't always know what to do with what he noticed. After that, he started talking more. About the noise of the factory. About how his hands were always sore. About how he never liked pie but ordered it anyway because it came with the meal. I told him about my long shifts, my tired feet, and my dream of someday having a place of my own, with curtains I chose and a kitchen that felt warm. It took him weeks to ask me out. Not to dinner, not to a movie, just for a walk. We walked down quiet streets, sometimes talking, sometimes not. And somehow, the silence never felt uncomfortable. He told me he grew up just outside town, that his father died when he was young, that he left school early to help his mother. I told him about my parents, about how my father worked himself tired, and my mother worried about everything. We were both young, both careful, both looking for something steady. We married 2 years later. It was a small wedding. Folding chairs in a little church, a cake from the grocery store. I wore my mother's dress, altered at the waist, and Frank wore a suit that was a little too big in the shoulders. He held my hands so tightly during the vows that my fingers went numb. Afterward, he told me he just wanted to be sure I didn't change my mind. We weren't rich, we weren't exciting, but we were steady. Frank worked at the factory for nearly 40 years. Same place, same shift. I learned the rhythm of his days by heart, the sound of his truck pulling into the driveway, the way the door would open, then close, then his boots would scrape against the mat as he took them off. He came home every evening smelling of oil and metal, shoulders tired, eyes soft when he saw me. I stayed home when our daughter Emily was born. Those years were full and exhausting. Bottles in the night, laundry that never seemed to end, worry about money that sat heavy in my chest. Frank would come home tired, but he never complained. He'd take Emily from my arms so I could rest, walking her up and down the hallway until she slept again. When Emily was older, I went back to work part-time. We stretched every dollar, fixed what broke, made do. There were years when we counted pennies at the kitchen table, wondering if we could afford new tires or if they'd have to last one more winter. Frank would always say, "We'll manage, Rosie. We always do." And somehow we did. Frank wasn't a man of big words. He didn't write cards. He didn't make speeches. He didn't say, "I love you" every day. Instead, he fixed things. The loose step on the porch, the leaky sink, the car that wouldn't start on cold mornings. He packed my lunch when I worked late, waited up when I wasn't home yet, sat beside me when my mother died, holding my hand without saying a word. That was his language. And I told myself it was enough. Still, there were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wishing he would turn to me and say something more. Something soft. Something that told me in words what I meant to him. But he rarely did, and I learned not to ask. Years passed. Emily grew up, left for college, built her own life. And slowly, it became just Frank and me in this house. Two people who knew each other's routines so well we could move around each other in the dark without speaking. We grew older together. Gray hair, stiff joints, longer pauses between steps. Evenings sitting side by side, not talking much but comfortable. Then Frank got sick. At first it was small things, tiredness, a cough that wouldn't go away, shortness of breath. He brushed it off, said it was age catching up to him. It was. Cancer doesn't announce itself loudly. It steals time quietly. Doctor visits became part of our routine. Medications lined up on the counter. Long, quiet nights where I listened to his breathing and watched his chest rise and fall, afraid that if I fell asleep, I might miss something important. He never complained, not once. Even when the pain made his hands shake, even when walking across the room left him breathless, he would smile and say he had a good life and couldn't ask for more. I hated when he said that. It sounded too much like goodbye. He died on a quiet Tuesday morning holding my hand. His eyes were half open, his voice barely there. "Rose," he whispered, "you've always been enough." Then he was gone. Those were the last words he ever said to me. The weeks after the funeral blurred together. People came, people left. Food filled the fridge, cards lined the table. And then, slowly, life returned to normal. For everyone but me. The house became too big, the nights too long, the silence too heavy. I packed some of his things away because seeing them hurt too much. His coats, his hats, his old notebooks. And one thing I wrapped in an old towel and pushed into the back of the hall closet without thinking much about it. His typewriter. It stayed there. Until the morning, the rain wouldn't stop. Until the morning, the house felt heavier than usual. Until the morning, I told myself I was just looking for a spare blanket. I opened the closet door and saw it, wrapped in that same old towel, waiting in the dark. I stood there in the hallway for a long moment, the closet door still open, my hand resting on the frame as if I needed it to keep myself upright. The towel-wrapped shape sat in the darkness like it had been waiting all this time for me to notice it again. Frank's typewriter. I hadn't seen it since the week after the funeral. Emily had been there, helping me pack away some of his things because I couldn't bear to touch them myself. We didn't talk much that day. We just folded and wrapped and placed things into boxes, moving around each other quietly, both afraid that if we spoke too much, one of us might break. I remembered wrapping the typewriter in that towel. My hands had trembled then too. I told myself I was protecting it from dust, from damage, from time. But the truth was, I was hiding it. Because it hurt to look at anything that reminded me of the evenings he spent at that little desk by the window, his glasses low on his nose, shoulders hunched slightly forward, lost in thoughts he never shared. Now, years later, there it was again. I pulled it out slowly, the towel slipping loose in my hands, and carried it into the living room. It felt heavier than I remembered, or maybe I was just weaker now. I set it gently on the coffee table and stood there, staring at it like it might speak. The machine looked smaller, older, worn smooth at the edges where his hands had rested. Dust clung to the corners and the black paint had dulled with age, but it was still his. I could see him in it somehow. The way he used to straighten the paper before he started, the way he would pause, staring at nothing before continuing. I lowered myself into the chair across from it and folded my hands in my lap. For a long time, I didn't touch it. I just looked. I thought about all those evenings when I'd been in the kitchen, washing dishes or folding laundry, listening to the quiet sounds of him working behind me. I used to wonder what he was doing. Sometimes I'd ask, and he'd shrug and say, just putting thoughts somewhere. I never pushed. I figured everyone needed a place for their thoughts. I never imagined those thoughts might have been me. My fingers finally moved, brushing lightly over the keys. They were cool, firm, unfamiliar under my touch. I pressed one gently. It didn't move much, stiff from years of stillness. That's when I noticed it. There was paper inside. Not just one sheet. Several pages stacked neatly together, their edges yellowed with time. My heart began to pound so hard I could feel it in my throat. Frank never left paper in the machine. Never. When he finished something, he always pulled it out, straightened it, and tucked it into a folder or a drawer. He hated leaving things half done. Unless he never meant to leave them at all. My hands began to shake as I reached for the top page and eased it free. The paper felt thin and soft, fragile with age. The letters were uneven, the way typewriter letters always are, but still so clearly his. At the top of the page was a date. More than 20 years ago. And beneath it, the first line. My dearest Rose. My breath caught in my chest. He hadn't called me that out loud in years. Not since we were young. Not since life had become busy and heavy and full of routines. Seeing my name there, typed by his hands, made something inside me tighten painfully. I had to sit down. I held the page in both hands and began to read. I don't know if I will ever give you this. I probably won't. But tonight I feel like if I don't put these words somewhere, they will stay stuck inside me forever. I swallowed hard and kept going. I have never been good at saying how I feel when you are looking at me. I get scared I will say the wrong thing or not say enough. So I stay quiet, but I want you to know this. I see how much you do. I see how tired you are even when you pretend you are fine. I don't always know how to help, but I want you to know I notice. And I love you more than I ever learned how to show. By the time I reached the end of the page, my eyes were burning and tears had slipped down onto the paper. I wiped them away quickly, afraid of smearing the ink, then pressed the page to my chest. All those years, all those nights when I thought he didn't notice, when I thought he didn't understand how heavy life felt sometimes, when I wished he would say just one soft word to tell me everything was going to be all right. He had noticed. He had understood. He just never said it to me. I took a slow breath and reached for the next page. There were more letters, each one dated, each one beginning the same way. My dearest Rose. Some were written after arguments. I could tell by the careful tone of his words, by the way he seemed to be searching for the right way to say he cared without making things worse. In one, he wrote about a night we'd argued over something small, like money or a broken appliance, and how he walked away because he was afraid of saying something he couldn't take back. I know you think I don't care when I get quiet, he wrote, but the truth is I care too much. I'm afraid I'll hurt you if I speak when I'm angry, so I wait. I always hope you know that. I closed my eyes when I finished that one. How many times had I gone to bed angry, thinking he didn't care enough to fight? How many times had I stared at the ceiling, wishing he would come in and say something, anything, instead of letting the silence stretch between us? And all along, he had been writing these words instead. There were letters from ordinary days too, evenings when nothing special had happened. He wrote about sitting across from me at the kitchen table, watching me count the grocery money, wishing he could make things easier. He wrote about listening to me hum while I washed dishes, about the way I tucked my hair behind my ear when I was tired. He wrote about Emily. One letter, dated shortly after she was born, made my chest ache. I held her tonight while you slept, he wrote. She wrapped her little hand around my finger, and I was so afraid of doing something wrong that I hardly breathed. I don't know how to be the kind of father she deserves, but I promise I will try every day for her and for you. I smiled through my tears at that one. Frank had been such a good father. Quiet, steady, always there when it mattered, helping with homework even when he was exhausted, sitting through school plays after long shifts, teaching Emily how to ride her bike, jogging beside her until she found her balance. And yet here he was, worrying he wasn't enough. There were letters from the year Emily left for college. The house feels too quiet tonight, he wrote. I know you're trying to be strong for her and for me, but I see the way you linger in her room when you think I'm not watching. I don't know how to make this easier for you. I just want you to know that even when I don't say much, I'm here. I pressed that page to my chest and let myself cry. Because that night had been hard, and he had been there, even when I thought he was too quiet to understand. There was a letter from the year my mother died. I wish I could take the pain from you and carry it myself, he wrote. I don't know how to fix this. All I can do is sit beside you and hope you feel less alone. I hope you know that even when I don't say much, my heart is right there with yours. My hands trembled as I set that page down. He had always been there, even when I wished for more words. He had been there. Page after page, I read his heart laid out in neat lines of ink. Worries I never knew he carried. Love I never knew how to measure. Fears he never shared. Gratitude he never spoke. And in every single one, the same truth. He loved me. Deeply. He just never knew how to say it out loud. Finally, my hands reached the last page in the stack. This one had no date. And it wasn't finished. My beloved Rose. If you are reading this, then I suppose I finally ran out of time. I always thought I would say these things to you someday when I felt braver, when the moment was right. But the truth is, I was never brave enough, so I am saying them here instead. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. Every ordinary day with you was more than I ever deserved. I hope you know that. I hope you forgive me for being so quiet. And I hope, wherever I am, that I will finally know how to say out loud what I could not when I was there beside you. The sentence stopped there. No goodbye. No signature. Just empty space. I stared at it for a long time, my heart pounding, my fingers gripping the edges of the paper. He never finished it. He never got the chance. For years after Frank died, I had carried a quiet doubt inside me. It sat there in my chest, heavy and unanswered. Did he really know how much I loved him? Did he leave thinking he had failed me? Did he ever wish he had said more? Now, sitting alone in my living room with his words spread across my lap, I finally had my answer. He had loved me. Deeply. He just never dared to say it to my face. I gathered the letters carefully into a neat stack and held them against my chest. My shoulders shook as I cried, not loudly, not dramatically, but the way old grief comes, deep and steady, like something breaking open after being held too long. I hear you now, I whispered into the quiet room. I hear you. The house was still silent, but it didn't feel empty anymore. I sat there until the light in the room began to change, until the afternoon sun faded and shadows stretched across the floor. I didn't know how much time passed. It didn't matter. All that mattered was that, after years of wondering, after years of quiet doubt, I finally knew the truth. And it had been waiting for me in the dark all along. I don't remember when I finally stopped crying. Only that, at some point, my chest stopped aching so sharply, and my breathing slowed, and I realized the room had grown dim around me. Evening had come while I sat there with Frank's letters pressed to my heart. The house was quiet the way it always is now, but it felt different, not empty, just full of words that had waited years to be heard. I laid the letters carefully on the coffee table and stood up, my knees stiff, my body reminding me of every one of my years. I went into the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea, moving slowly, thoughtfully, like I was afraid that if I rushed, the moment might slip away from me. As I carried the mug back into the living room, my eyes fell on the typewriter again. It sat there, silent, dark, solid. The place where his words had lived before they ever reached me. For the first time since I pulled it from the closet, I didn't feel afraid of it. I felt drawn to it. I set my tea down and moved closer, resting my hands on the table beside the machine. For a long moment, I just stood there, breathing, listening to the quiet. Then a thought settled into my heart, gentle but steady. He had spoken. Now it was my turn. I went to the drawer where I kept old envelopes and loose papers and found a few blank sheets. My hands trembled as I rolled one into the typewriter, awkward at first, reminding myself how it worked. I hadn't used one in decades, but slowly my fingers found their places, as if they remembered something my mind had forgotten. I stared at the empty page. What do you say to someone who is already gone? What do you write when all the time you thought you had is finished? My throat tightened. I swallowed, took a breath, and began. Dear Frank, the letters came out uneven, a little crooked, but I didn't care. This wasn't about neatness. I found your letters today, every word you never gave me. And I want you to know, wherever you are, that I read them all. I paused, blinking back tears, then continued. I always thought you were quiet because you didn't feel things as deeply as I did. I thought maybe you just didn't know how to talk about feelings. I was wrong. You felt everything. You just didn't know how to let me see it. My fingers hesitated, then moved again. I wish you had trusted me with your fears. I wish you had told me how much you worried, how much you loved me, how afraid you were of leaving me alone, because I would have held you through all of it. Just like you held me in your own way all those years. Tears slipped down my cheeks and fell onto the paper, but I kept writing. You were never too little for me, Frank. You were never not enough. You were my home. Every ordinary day with you was more than I ever deserved. And even now, when the house feels too quiet and the nights feel too long, I still carry you with me. I stopped there for a moment, pressing my fingers against the keys, feeling the cool metal under my skin. Then I finished with the only words that felt right. Yours always, Rose. I leaned back in the chair and let my hands fall into my lap, the final line sitting there between us like a bridge across silence. For the first time since Frank died, I felt like I had spoken to him again. Not just in my thoughts, not just in whispers to the dark, but in a way that felt real. I pulled the page out carefully and placed it on top of his letters, making a small stack of our words together. Then I sat there for a long time, letting the quiet settle around me. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Not without dreams, but without that tight knot in my chest that usually woke me before morning. When I opened my eyes at dawn, the empty space beside me was still there. But it didn't feel quite as sharp. The days that followed felt different. Not lighter, not easier, just steadier. Every morning, I made my tea and sat by the window, the folder with Frank's letters resting on the table beside me. Sometimes I would open it and read just one letter. Sometimes I would read several. Each time I noticed something new, a turn of phrase, a small memory hidden in a line, a worry I hadn't known he carried. I began to see our life together differently. Moments I once thought were empty, I now understood were full in ways I hadn't known how to measure. The evenings when he sat quietly beside me on the couch. The mornings when he left early for work without waking me. The nights when he lay awake, staring at the ceiling while I slept. He had been loving me then, just in silence. Sometimes, after reading, I would sit at the typewriter and write again. Not every day, only when my heart felt too full to stay quiet. I wrote about small things, about the way the sunlight fell across the living room in the morning, about the neighbor's dog that barked at nothing, about how my knees ached when the weather changed. And sometimes I wrote about memories, our first apartment, the night he proposed, the road trip where we got lost and laughed until our sides hurt. It became a quiet ritual. not to cling to the past, but to honor it. One afternoon, about a week after I found the letters, Emily came by. She knocked this time, even though she has a key, and when I opened the door, she looked at me closely and said, "You sound different on the phone, Mom. Are you okay?" "I think I am," I said, and I meant it. We sat in the living room with cups of tea. Her eyes went to the typewriter on the desk near the window. "I forgot Dad had that thing," she said softly. "Why is it out?" I hesitated for a moment, then told her everything. About the closet, about the letters, about what he had written, about what it meant. She listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped tightly around her mug. By the time I finished, her eyes were shining. "I never knew he felt like that," she said quietly. "He was always so quiet with us too." "He was," I agreed, "but he felt more than he ever showed." She wiped her eyes. "I wish I had known." "So do I said, "but maybe knowing now is still something." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm glad you found them, Mom. I think he would be too." After she left, I sat alone again, but it didn't feel the same as before. The house was still quiet, but now it held his words. And mine. Weeks passed. Life didn't suddenly become easy. The house was still too big for one person. The nights were still long. I still caught myself reaching for him in the dark, still set out 2 cups some mornings before remembering. Grief doesn't vanish just because you understand it better. But something inside me had shifted. I no longer carried doubt. I no longer wondered if he had loved me enough. I knew. One evening, as I sat by the window watching the sun sink behind the houses across the street, painting the sky in soft orange and gray, I thought back to that moment at the diner, all those years ago. When he told me, I hummed while pouring coffee. He had seen me then. He had always seen me, even when he didn't know how to say it. I realized then that we had both spent years being strong in our own quiet ways, both afraid to burden the other with our fears, our hopes, our need for reassurance. We had loved each other the best we knew how. It just hadn't always looked the way love does in stories. It had looked like packed lunches, like early mornings, like fixing broken things, like staying even when staying was hard. And now, in my old age, his words had finally found me. I placed my hand on the typewriter and whispered, "Thank you, Frank, for not throwing them away." Because if he had, I would have spent the rest of my life wondering. Instead, I carried a different kind of grief now. Not the grief of doubt, but the grief of love fully known, too late to answer in the way I wished I could have. Still, even that felt like a gift. These days when I wake before the sun, I still reach out sometimes before I remember. The space beside me is still empty, but I don't feel quite so lost in it anymore. Because I know something now that I didn't know before. He loved me. Not quietly, not a little, but deeply. He just never dared to say it out loud. Until I found his words. After my husband died, I found his old typewriter. And in it, I finally heard his voice. And once I did, the quiet in this house didn't feel so empty anymore. It felt like peace,